Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are in our third series of a four-part series for community assistance that really started out in a place that was different than where it's ending because, as we've all seen, the need has grown so very much for resources like this. And at MPTF, who is about to turn 100 and whose mission is rooted in supporting in our entertainment community in living and aging well with dignity and purpose and helping each other in times of need. And what better time than now? So we want to thank our moderator, Dr. Scott Kaiser, who's a practicing geriatrician and the Chief Innovation Officer for MPTF, for moderating this third series, and to welcome our Director of Community Social Services and Engagement, Naomi Rada, who is unbelievable. She's a licensed clinical social worker. She's also accredited in veteran services and has helped to get people to receive a lot of retroactive benefits to our veterans in our community. Her and her other senior staff and her entire team have worked tirelessly to answer triple the amount of intake calls. So we thank you for coming to us. We're sorry you have to, and we hope that we can provide a resource. And we also have the pleasure of listening to Freda Johnson, our Director of Volunteering, and you'll hear much more about these two incredible women later. Director of Community Services, or Director of Volunteering and Community Engagement, who's doing some really wonderful work. And Greg Seymour, who is a longtime volunteer who has worked with Fredda. So I just want to give a very quick MPTF update. You are here to hear from the experts on the subject. I will say, when I mentioned this is 3 in a 4-part series, we weren't prepared to do a 4-part series, but the need is there. And we're so excited to say that on December 16th, one day less than a month from today, we are closing this out with Dr. Kaiser moderating again, Rabbi Rosenberg, and our chaplain, Dina Cooperstock, to talk about spirituality. You guys, this is non-denominational. It is not about religion per se. It is about the spiritual aspect of life and dealing with 2020 in a very thoughtful way. And I think it's a blessing for all of us. I know I'm looking forward to myself logging in to learn and listen from these two experts and to hear the questions that will come from Dr. Kaiser, which are so founded in science and kindness and empathy, to hear this conversation. So we'll share more information with you. Today, we're going to hear about volunteering, caregiving, the times where it's really hard to be of service and when you have to be of service to others, whether it's caregiving for an elder or a child. We have many resources on this subject. If you want further information, please feel free to reach out. We will be very active in the chat. And thank you so much. We are closing in on the end of a very complicated year. We're very happy to have you here. And with that, I really just want to throw it to the experts because this is what it's all about. So Kathy Davis and Louis Anchando, thank you very much for putting this together. And without further ado, you have Dr. Scott Kaiser.
Thanks, Courtney. Thank you so much. I'm Scott Kaiser. I'm a geriatrician and the Chief Innovation Officer here at MPTF. Yes, this is, it just keeps going. Obviously, we've had these webinars where we talk about, dealing with COVID and what kind of resources are available. And we know that COVID levels are through the roof, and the holidays are coming, and the holidays can be a wonderful time, but can also be a very stressful time, and certainly a time that we're going to have to adapt this year. So I think this is very timely, the two topics that we're going to be discussing today. Again, they are so aligned with the MPTF mission of supporting our community and living and aging well, helping each other in times of need. Caregiving and volunteering, two topics that are just right in the core of the MPTF DNA, and things that we know are so important to many members of our community. So looking forward to some discussion there. So without really further ado, I'd like to introduce our first presenter, Naomi Rada. So Naomi is a licensed clinical social worker and director of home and community-based services at Mptf. She's also an accredited VA claims agent, and she runs Mptf's Veterans Benefits Assistance Program. This program is just really unbelievable, has helped countless people. I'm sure Naomi will share a little bit more about that. I hope some of you noticed the great recognition of Naomi in the recent Variety issue focused on veterans. Just incredible work that she does there. Naomi's clinical areas of interest include veterans, as we just said, older adults in general, and also end-of-life issues. She received her master's in social work from NYU, so New York, love it, NYU. And this is, I knew that Naomi was the proud mother of 2 teenage boys, wonderful kids, but this I didn't know, which is one of the things I love about getting to moderate this series, the things you learn about people, is that Naomi is the proud mother, is also been a loving foster mother to nearly 70 golden retrievers. So I'm going to have to hear more about that. 70 golden retrievers. That's a lot of cuteness. And so that without further ado, let's thank Naomi for being here today and joining us to discuss ways, really just caregiver issues in general, beginning with how to recognize when a family member is in need of a caregiver, and when a caregiver is showing some signs that they might need some help as well. So Naomi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Scott. So a little bit about caregiving. It's a pretty huge topic to try to cover in 30 short minutes. So we're just gonna kind of hit the highlights today. And I think what is striking for many people about caregiving is many people don't really see themselves as caregivers. And so I just kind of want to open our minds a little bit to what is a caregiver? We all know, a formal caregiver that you pay to come into your home to help your loved one with, various activities of daily living. We've all seen the Visiting Angels commercials, the Home Instead commercials. And I think a lot of people see that as what a caregiver is. And that's what we would consider a formal caregiver. But most of us, if you're at a certain point in your life, have found ourselves in the role of informal caregiver. And that's kind of what we're talking about today. What is an informal caregiver? An informal caregiver is running over to the pharmacy to pick up a prescription for someone you love. In the early days of COVID, going grocery shopping because we didn't want our older family members in the grocery store at the pharmacy and in places where they could be exposed because of their, particular vulnerability. It's also things like IT tech support. How many people have gotten a call from their parents saying, my printer's not working, I don't know how to put my phone on silent, those types of things. It's going over on the weekend and, helping out with the laundry, helping out with cleaning the house. It's all of those things and more. So most of the time we start out as informal caregivers, as our loved ones get a little older and they're less mobile, maybe they are not driving so much at night anymore or only driving short distances during the day. We start off by kind of becoming this informal caregiver where we're just kind of there to shore them up a little bit. But that is a form of caregiving. And I think we all need to open our minds and recognize that once you start doing that, you're on the caregiving journey path. And it's important to kind of understand where you're at and where that may lead. So that's my first point.
Yeah, that's very important because even based on what you just said, I don't normally think of myself as a caregiver, but I've been doing a lot of those things for older relatives, including the grocery shopping and the tech support. And, it is helpful to put it in the context that somebody is depending upon me and that I'm taking that caregiver responsibility and role. on the other side of the coin, in terms of, I mean, I think that's very helpful to just put a name on it and to understand, you know, I know people who are doing a lot, like really doing personal care. Their parents or some other relative are completely dependent, and they still don't think of themselves as a caregiver. And I think we'll come back to that in terms of why that matters, in terms of really putting a point on that, of recognizing your role as a caregiver. But on the other side, when we're dealing with aging parents, for example, and we're trying to figure out, we're concerned about them, when do you start that conversation? You know, how do you kind of, it can be very uncomfortable. I mean, this is, you know, let's take your parents, for example. You know, it's somebody who's been in charge, been responsible for you for so much of your life, and all of a sudden you're concerned about them, and they might not like you kind of poking around and telling them what they need or don't need. You must get asked that a lot. How do you approach that?
Well, I like to use, there was a study done by the home care company Home Instead, and it's very easy to remember. They have this rule called the 40-70 rule. The 40-70 rule is, if you are age 40 or over, or your parents are age 70 or older, it's time to start talking. Just to start opening up conversation. And really the idea behind opening up these conversations and asking questions and being curious is not to say, I think I need to take over your finances, or, you know, we don't start from there. But it's more to open up a dialogue and say, hey, you know, I'm just wondering, you know, do you guys have a will set up or a trust? You know, have you given any thought to what you would want, you know, if at some point you weren't able to drive anymore, you know? So it's more asking questions. And yes, it's very difficult to start to open that dialogue. And that's one of the ways that Mptf can help. We can help give you the language to start having those conversations. We can even facilitate those conversations if you really don't want to go there with your parents. But, you know, the time to start talking about driving concerns is not after there's been multiple fender benders, or God forbid, you know, a bigger accident. You know, the time to start talking about powers of attorney for finances and healthcare is not at the time when a person is in the hospital. That's the worst time. And my colleague, Anne Front, is actually going to be doing a workshop on advanced directives tomorrow. So we can put that information in the chat if anybody would like to know more about an advanced healthcare directive, or otherwise known as power of attorney for healthcare, and how to set those up. So these conversations are really important to have in a proactive way, and just to start opening the and you may get nowhere. You know, you may get shut down the first 2, 5, 7 times. I started having this conversation with my in-laws years ago, just about setting up a trust. And it actually took a health crisis for them to do it. And here I am, you know, a geriatric social worker with 15 years of experience. And it still took me, you know, a couple of years to get them on the right path. So the earlier we can start dialogue, I think the better it's going to be in terms of outcomes. And really approaching it as a conversation rather than a directive. You know, you shouldn't be driving anymore. It's time to take the keys away. You know, versus I'm a little concerned, you know, I've noticed there's like more scratches on the car. You know, what should we do about that?
Yeah. So that's great. So Naomi, you pointed out there's some great resources that have been posted in the chat. And we're going to keep adding to that. The main thing being that, you know, just call, right? Just call. You know, Mptf has social workers that they live and breathe to do this, right? So to help you through these difficult situations, that's what our whole team is about. So, you know, and again, as you're saying, this really is one of those cases where an ounce of prevention is worth many pounds of cure. And it's just better to be proactive. It's really never too soon. I love that 40-70 rule, but, you know, never too soon to just start having open dialogue. Now, I think we can come back to some of the concerns where it's really tricky, where, there is tension in terms of independence, right? And obviously a lot of this is framing it around helping somebody preserve the most independence possible, so by making some little changes, maybe even some little sacrifices early. But let's talk about somebody who is in a heavy caregiving role, who's assumed a lot of responsibility. And there's probably people on this call that are responsible for children and parents and other relatives. I mean, it's unbelievable the weight that people are carrying. I don't even know if you have any stats on that, Naomi, in terms of how common it is. I know it's something that impacts workforce a lot. But I want to understand it can be a real gift, a real joy in life to be able to provide lovingly for people who've provided for you, but it can also be a tremendous weight. And there are even syndromes and conditions and, caregiver strain and burden and burnout. What's that all about? And what are some of the signs that the caregiver themselves might need some care and attention?
Yeah, caregiver burnout is a real thing. And, while I don't have specific statistics, we know that, a person who's experiencing caregiver burnout can manifest physical illness, emotional upheaval, impairment in relationships and socialization opportunities. So it really, when someone starts to sort of go down the path of becoming burned out as a caregiver, it's something that we really are concerned about as social workers. I know physicians are too. And there are risks that come along with caregiver burnout. So, I kind of want to highlight some of the things to be looking out for, and I'm sure Dr. Kaiser, you can speak to this as well. In the physical domain, people that are experiencing caregiver burnout have a higher risk of elevated blood pressure, heart disease, panic attacks, being overweight. Because when we're caregiving for someone, we're usually putting ourselves second. It's when you're really in the thick of it, our needs become secondary. And that's when we start to see, things kind of fall apart. So we really want to be looking out for any physical signs and symptoms that something is changing for us within our own selves when we're caregiving for somebody else. On the emotional side, we often see things like increased anxiety, increased depression, increased irritability, increase in substance issues, using alcohol or substances to help cope, to take the edge off at night. All of those things are signs that the stress is becoming unmanageable. And we need to work on ways to mitigate that, to restore balance. And in the social realm, we see things like, primary marital relationships being impacted, relationships with children. It can start to affect job performance. If you're having, especially in the industry, if you're having to miss work or leave work early, because somebody fell or there's a problem and you have to kind of leave what you're doing. So it can really wreak havoc on all of the domains that we as social workers in particular are looking at in service of our clients. So we really, really want, if any of these, if you're checking any of these boxes as I'm talking, these are things to be thinking about. The good news is, there are resources, there is support out there. You're not alone in your caregiving journey. People, are on the continuum. You may have somebody that's just starting to realize that, and the holidays are often such a pinpoint, in time, especially now. We haven't seen our relatives maybe except over Zoom in a while. Maybe we have a plan to visit somebody for Thanksgiving or for, Christmas. And we see all that's been able to be compensated for because we haven't seen them in person.
Yeah.
You know, we maybe aren't seeing the furniture walking because we're seeing them over Zoom. You know, maybe we aren't seeing the inability kind of to track in a large group because we're just focusing one-on-one. So all of these things are little nuances that we often pick up at the holidays when we're first seeing somebody that we haven't seen in a long time. So it can be there, or we can be, you know, in the middle, or even towards the end where it's full-time 24/7, you know, we're really not able to work consistently. You know, so all of these things are along the caregiver continuum that we need to watch out for.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's just to simplify what you're saying about the caregiver burnout. It really is that thing about, you know, when there's a drop in cabin pressure, put your oxygen mask on before assisting others. And thankfully, there's increased recognition of this in healthcare that you know, caregivers are carrying the load, and that you're not going to be able to help your loved one if you don't help yourself first. And I know this, you know, naturally it's like a very selfless act, very selfless person who just wants to give to their loved one and you know, keep putting that other person first. And that's beautiful, but you have to be able to, and it takes a different kind of strength to put yourself first sometimes, to be able to just, even so that you can be a resource to your loved one going forward. But before we talk about strategies to manage caregiver burnout, I'm curious, since you brought it up with Zoom and everything, can you share with us what you're seeing out there in terms of the impact of COVID and, you know, this crazy roller coaster that we've all been on, you know, emotional roller coaster, physical roller coaster, and how it's impacting caregivers and making things even more difficult or stressful?
Well, you know, Scott, you're one of the social isolation experts at Mptf, and you know, we have a wonderful program that addresses, you know, the impact of social isolation, and you know, that I think that's been one of the biggest and most devastating impacts of COVID-19 is the social isolation that it's put all of us in, you know, regardless of our age. You know, those of us that are working from home, that are used to being in an office and having colleagues and, you know, being able to share with our colleagues, even if it's something mundane, like, hey, did you watch the last episode of blah, 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 you know, at the water cooler, you know, all that sort of stuff that we do. So being forced, you know, into the little Zoom box, as we often are now, it's a different animal entirely. You know, we are, as humans, we are social beings. You know, even the most introverted of us are still crave social connection. So I think that's been, I would say, you know, from my personal experience in talking with clients, it is the social isolation, you know, it is sort of maybe the primary. And then there's all of the other stressors on top of it. You know, am I at increased risk because I have underlying physical conditions? You know, the financial stress of my work being impacted, my stability being impacted. So I think it's, you know, it's a complex and very layered thing. You know, it's not just the physical, am I at risk for COVID, but it's everything that comes with it. You know, and Zoom can be helpful in some ways because at least we can, you know, we can see each other eye to eye, and there's, you know, at least we have eye contact, at least we can see each other's nonverbal language, but it doesn't really give us the whole picture. You know, if somebody's falling in their home and they don't want their adult child to know that because they're concerned about what that would mean for their independence, and they're Zooming with their adult child, look, you know, you're only seeing me from the, you know, from the collarbone up. You don't know if I've been falling. You don't know if my legs are swollen. So, you know, these are just things that we, as the social workers that usually do home visits and are in people's homes and trying to understand how people are living, these are things that are impacting us directly in terms of how we interact with our clients, let alone family members, when, you know, there tends to be more secret keeping because people are concerned about losing their independence and their autonomy.
Yeah. You know, before I respond about the social isolation piece, because I'm so glad you brought that up. even under normal circumstances, you deal a lot in supporting remote caregivers, right? So there must be a lot of, again, when people think of, geez, I don't even know if I need to, but why don't I just call the Mptf Elder Connection line? Like, just, I don't know. I just need to, and maybe in talking to them, I'll figure out, oh, I really did need some support. Because I mean, you deal with people who are caregiving for somebody who's on the other side of the country, right? So even under normal circumstances, you have ways to help guide people of how they can be there even without physically being there, right?
Yes. Even though we're based in Los Angeles, we have, adult children whose parents are living in Los Angeles. They may be living in Chicago, Cleveland, wherever, New York, Maine, Hawaii. We've seen pretty much all of it. Or the reverse, the adult child is living here and working in the industry, and their parent, is living in New York or Chicago or, Detroit or wherever, and they can't be there. Forget about COVID. They can't be there because of the distance and because of the impact that their work schedule has. And we all know how the industry is really not always family friendly. We are very astute at finding local resources, at partnering with local agencies, at figuring out, where is the best place, where is the closest senior center in Detroit that offers, case management and Meals on Wheels. That's a couple phone calls for us. For somebody that doesn't know, that's like mind blowing. You don't even know where to begin. So, I want to reiterate your message, Dr. Kaiser, that if you don't know, if you think you might need something, but you don't even know what it is, we will help you figure that out. You don't have to call us and say, this is what's happening and I know what I need. You can call us and say, I just feel like I'm worried about my whoever, and I don't know what to do. I don't know where to start. That's okay. We're very used to, chipping away at the marble statue and figuring out, what needs to be first, what needs to be second, how can we help? And so all of that, I think, is really that's in our wheelhouse. And, we really want to be there for the industry, in whatever capacity we can be.
Yeah. And going back to social isolation, it is striking that even under normal circumstances, caregivers suffer at much greater rates of feeling lonely and being isolated. And we recognize this. And, so there are resources. Maureen Feldman, our Director of Social Isolation Impact, is leading a group for caregivers where they get together on Zoom or some virtual platforms. We have special call programs that are targeted towards caregivers. If anybody is a caregiver for somebody with dementia, that's a whole different experience. And there's all different complexities in terms of being a caregiver for somebody who has cognitive issues. We have a lot of resources directed just at really focusing on addressing social isolation for those groups of people. Along those lines, Naomi, can you tell us about other resources, just in general, before we get back to Mptf resources, of how to manage your caregiver burnout? I mean, you said, first of all, let's recognize that we're a caregiver. Second of all, let's recognize that caregiver burnout is a real thing and not be in denial about it and just pull the ripcord if we need help. What are some things we can do to take better care of ourselves in this context?
So, I mean, the analogy that you made about the oxygen mask is so illustrative of what we're talking about here. We can't possibly be good to the person that we love and care about if we're not being good to ourselves. So obviously, if you're having any of the, physical or emotional, if you're feeling like some of those things are happening for you, obviously you can go see your primary care doctor, and you should be checked out from a health perspective, because as I said, we do know that blood pressure can be severely impacted. Weight management, increased risk for diabetes, heart disease, all those things are real. In terms of self-care, I make it a point just because the work that I do and the work that my colleagues do, it is very stressful. I make it a point to incorporate self-care on a daily basis. It's not always the same thing for me, but something every day, even if it's 15 minutes, 20 minutes, doesn't have to be a complete overhaul of who we are as people. For me, I go up and I sit on our roof for 10 to 15 minutes when the sun's out, and I don't do anything. I just sit there and I just look, So I think incorporating and making a point of doing it for yourself, even if that means you have to calendar it on your Outlook calendar and mark from 12 to 12:30, self-care. Sometimes we really need that reminder. And again, as we're caring for other people, we're always putting our needs secondary. So the more we can break time out for ourselves to do whatever that is, Scott, you mentioned at the beginning, the fostering of the golden retrievers. That's been a huge part of our self-care as a family for 9 years now. So whatever that is for you, the people that are watching, really take the time. If you take nothing away from my caregiving talk here, I strongly encourage you to take some time and think about what is it that I can do for myself that's achievable, that is self-care. And really make a promise to yourself and make a commitment to yourself that you're going to do that for 15 minutes for the next 7 days. And see if you can, and keep yourself accountable, check it off. Yes, I did it. No, I didn't. And why didn't I do it? And I think as you start to incorporate that, it will become a more inherent part of what you do. There are online caregiver support groups through, the Alzheimer's LA. There are many different, resources that are out there for online support groups. I know in person, obviously, we're not even doing now. And online support groups for the industry evenings and weekends. We can always find a caregiver support group in your area. If you go to the Alzheimer's Association website and you type in your zip code, they'll have a support group for you that you can join. You can call us, if you don't, we'll find you a support group. We can find you an individual therapist if you think that's something that would be helpful. So there's lots of ways to, mitigate the risks of caregiver burnout. I think just understanding that it is a real thing. You're not crazy. You may feel crazy. You're not crazy. You're not overreacting. You're not being dramatic. Whatever message you're giving yourself in your head about how you're feeling or what you're doing, it's probably caregiver burnout. And there are things that we can do to mitigate those signs and symptoms.
Well, you're good, Naomi. Let me tell you, because you made me realize in this brief conversation that I'm a caregiver. I probably am having a little caregiver burnout, though, with a heavy dose of COVID fatigue, probably. And I need to prioritize my self-care. And it was really just wonderful listening to you. I hope other people felt that, in terms of really just that reminder because it can be so hard. We all have so many things that we, pulling at us, but I am going to put something on my calendar for today and for tomorrow for some self-care. Because, I haven't been, it's very important. That's really an important reminder how far caregivers can suffer from sleep issues, going back to the basics, healthy eating, getting a good night's sleep, taking good care of your primary health needs. That's really critical. So just to take it home, Naomi, in terms of, again, I think you've really emphasized resources that Mptf has. You've talked about things that you want the audience members to take away from this talk. But again, just bringing it back home to the fact that we're going into the holidays. COVID rates are higher than they've been. I mean, it's just the drama in so many domains of our life just continues to mount. Maybe a little end in sight with the vaccine, but so much unknown. Talk to us, especially the caregivers amongst us, just with parting thoughts.
You know, this is to use the metaphor, you know, this is a marathon, not a sprint. You know, the average person who enters the caregiving space is going to be there for years. Likely not weeks, likely not months. This is a long haul situation. So the more prepared you can be, the more empowered you can be in knowing that there's help out there and knowing that it's okay to ask for help, even if you don't think, even if you're not sure you know what you need. I think one of the hardest steps we have to take is asking for help. There's still so much shame and so much stigma around, I should be able to do this. You know, my parents did it for me, or, you know, whatever, again, whatever internal dialogue we're having with each other or with ourselves about what we should be doing, how we should be doing it, that there's no reason we can't, you know, why can't we figure this out? Why can't we do it all? That's stinking thinking, as we say in the field. So being gentle with ourselves, that this is a long haul. We're gonna have days where we're not at our best. We're gonna have days where we're gonna snap at the person that we love because it's just too much. Being gentle with ourselves, being non-judgmental of the job that we're doing, and knowing that it's okay to ask for help. It doesn't make us less of a person, less of a caregiver, to reach out and call someone. And we can be that someone. You know, I know lots of people that they don't want to call their sibling, or they don't want to call their friend because they don't want to be a burden. And you know, this person's heard it all before. That even their spouse or their partner is kind of over hearing about it. Then call us. We're a blank slate, and we're always going to listen, and we're never going to judge.
Oh, it's wonderful. And thank you so much for taking the time, Naomi. I'm seeing notes directed to me in the chat about, you know, people that you've helped and people that it's just so inspiring how you and your teams have helped so many caregivers through uncertain times, hard times. And here we are in a time where everybody could use a little help. Some of us need a lot of help right now. And I love that you're saying, throw any stigma and shame out the window and just, you know, reach out. And I think it's a perfect transition actually to Freda Johnson, who I'll bring on now, because Naomi mentioned a lot about the joy that she gets out of fostering the golden retrievers. So her sense of purpose and giving back. And then in terms of people needing help, that we have this whole army of people that Freda is commanding, this army of people who want to help, who live to help. So it's a real pleasure to transition over and bring on Freda Johnson, who has been on board in an official role with Mptf staff since 2016, when she created the Community and Volunteer Engagement Department, but has a much longer history with Mptf than that. I'll also note that the volunteer program at Mptf was recognized as a program of distinction by Generations United, and that's really the benchmark for the highest quality of intergenerational programming. And this has all been done under Freda's leadership. Freda has been able to produce meaningful opportunities that bring people together. And we talk about social isolation. Freda is building programs that bring people together, and really where the lines between giving and receiving are blurred. You know, it's unclear who's the volunteer, who's the recipient. It's everybody's winning. Win, win, win. And as an advocate for well-being and volunteerism, Freda enriches the lives of others through the development, planning, and implementation of innovative programs. They're designed to benefit residents on our Wasserman campus and industry members everywhere, including older industry members who are aging in place. Freda is currently overseeing over 1,000 active volunteers who have over 48,000 hours of service, 48,000 hours of service last year, and probably on track to have same or more this year. And Freda, before her time at Mptf, she produced theater, worked in television development, and was a contributing writer to LA Magazine. So thank you so much, Freda, for being here and sharing with us about volunteer programs at Mptf.
You're welcome. Thanks for that introduction. Before I actually start about volunteering, I want to thank all the volunteers who are on the webinar right now and are listening. We have terrific volunteers who give great service both before the pandemic and afterwards. So I do want to recognize everyone who's listening now. To everything that Naomi said, volunteering is really the antidote. Whether it's you're burned out and you want to reduce your stress level, you're depressed, you are no longer working in a particular job, or if you've lost a family member or friend and you need to find something to do to take your mind away from whatever that event was, volunteering is really one of the best ways to do it. You and Naomi talked about social isolation. It's always been right at the forefront of what seniors are feeling. Whether they're alone, they've lost family, they've lost friends, but now everybody's feeling it. And we at Mptf have been able to find ways to include people through different volunteer activities. One of them is organized chaos, which we'll talk about. But just being active and being engaged really does reduce the stress and the social isolation. Volunteering, yes, you give of yourself, you're doing something great for someone, and they are the recipient of your generosity. But what it does to the person who's volunteering, is all of the people on the call could probably attest to, is a feeling of well-being that they receive from giving of themselves. There was a study done pretty recently by the Corporation for National and Community Service. And out of that study, 63% of the people found a decrease in depression and social isolation, and 46% found an increase in improved health and overall well-being. And that's what volunteering does.
Absolutely. That is so wonderful. And so, Freda, just help give us an overview. I know things have really changed with COVID, to state the obvious, and we'll get into some of those changes. But can you give us just an overview of volunteer services at Mptf and all our programs, and how many volunteers and what kinds of things people were doing pre-COVID? And then,
pre-COVID, we had over 100 activities on campus that volunteers would participate in, either helping with activities or creating workshops, and they led the volunteer activity. We had drawing workshops, and we currently have an arts and crafts workshop where we're having a volunteer come in now. But pre-COVID, we would have a full house of volunteers. We would always have 50 to 100 volunteers on campus daily, walking with residents, communicating with residents, helping them, just being great companions. We also have volunteers in the community who would do friendly visiting or helping with computers and tablets, learning how to use those, doing grocery shopping for people out in the community. So it was, and then we have our junior volunteer program, which is very robust, and juniors who are 13 years through college age would come and help in our, in Mary Pickford House, which is our long-term care and memory care residents. And they would come after school, they would come on weekends, and they're no longer able to do that. So when COVID hit, we had to pivot very quickly and be very adaptable. In some ways, there was a silver lining to it through Zoom. We learned how to use Zoom to our advantage, not just with continuing visits by Zoom or calls. Daily Call Sheet, which is our established phone reassurance program, is absolutely terrific, where Maureen Feldman, who runs it, matches volunteers with recipients for long-term regular relationships. When COVID hit, we very nimbly started a new program called Care Calls, which was aligned with Governor Newsom's call to have people calling friends and neighbors who are over 65, check-in calls to make sure they were okay, to make sure that they weren't completely isolated, find out if they needed something. So we've done that. We've made over, I think to date, 6,000 calls. We originally were going to be doing this 65 and over, and we really started at 71 through 100 and I think 6. And we've now exhausted all of those calls thanks to our almost 300 volunteers who have been making those calls. And now we're just going to begin calling people 65 to 71. But it's been very successful, not only in reducing the social isolation that they feel, some of those calls have continued, but also finding out if there are things that they need. And then we refer them to social services. And that is how we work. We're a very holistic organization, and our departments blend together. Other ways that we have pivoted since COVID is, as I mentioned before, Organized Chaos, which is our variety show that's on Channel 22, which is our in-house media studio. And Jen Clymer does a great job by putting different shows together. I'm responsible for 2 of those. One is going on right now called Inside Hollywood. And we have Hawk Koch, who is not only on our board of directors and a terrific producer in his own right, but he stepped up to host this show. And through Inside Hollywood, we bring Hollywood luminaries to just talk about whatever they want to talk about. Today, we have Billy Ray, who brought us the Comey Report and is an esteemed screenwriter. A couple of weeks ago, we had Brian Grazer and Ron Howard. We're also doing Behind the Book that Hawk is also hosting, and we're bringing best-selling authors to our Zoom platform through Organized Chaos. Now, all of those people are volunteering their time. It's terrific. We're getting a much larger audience through Zoom and connecting with people in the community who for that hour are being engaged in a really meaningful and wonderful way. So those are a couple of ways that we've pivoted. We also have a grocery program. So once COVID hit, we understood that there was going to be a lot of food insecurity. And in fact, there was. So our social workers reached out to their clients. We did presentations to the different locals and guilds, and we received requests from many people in the industry. And through the generosity, again, of our volunteers, the volunteers would come to our campus on Fridays, pick up the groceries, they'd pop their trunk, everything was contactless, drive it over to the recipient's house, leave it at their front door. And to date, we've made, I think, about 700 grocery deliveries by about 24 volunteers. That's yet another way we're engaging volunteers to be involved.
That's wonderful. And so do you still have new volunteers coming on? And what would I do if I want to become a volunteer, especially if I'm worried about, COVID? Maybe I'm older and trying to be extra careful myself. Could I still volunteer?
You can, because we have virtual ways you can volunteer where you're not coming to the campus, which has to do mostly with calling people. But then if you want to come to campus, we have a great program, which is visitation. Since we weren't able to have family members on campus visiting their loved ones in the very beginning, once we got the okay to do that, we started the visitation program. And the only way we can do that is with the help of volunteers who are overseeing to make sure that everybody remains masked and they're 6 feet apart and there's no physical contact, and just making sure that the protocols set up by the state, the county, the city, and us are followed. Every volunteer needs to come to campus and be tested for COVID every other week. So we are living within a bubble on campus where we know that the staff is being tested, residents are being tested, and volunteers are being tested. So that's one of the ways to be involved on campus. If anybody wants to know more about what they can do, you can go to volunteering@mptf.com. Another program that's been very successful, especially now, is Angel Cards. And Angel Cards was set up a year ago to write birthday cards to our residents and people in the community. When you get older, your circle of friends and family shrink. When it comes to your birthday and you go to your mailbox, you're probably not going to see, or they're probably not going to see as many cards as they normally would have. So the intent of this program was to fill everybody's mailbox with these joyous cards. And we've had probably, I don't know, 5,000 to 7,000 cards since inception that have been sent. We are accepting cards for birthdays. We will send the first names and birthday date of our residents to maintain confidentiality. We don't give out last names, but we have personalized birthday cards that are going to all of our residents. And then for the holidays, we invite people to write as many cards as they would like, and then we distribute them. It's a really beautiful program, and people are getting quite creative in how they do it. Not only writing these great messages, but decorating the envelopes and the cards themselves. My favorite example is I believe he's an art director working on the Kaminsky method. And he snipped wallpaper and fabric from the show and decorated the front of the card and then explained what all those little pieces of fabric were. And I'm sure whoever received that felt a connection to what they had felt when they were in the industry. And that's another beautiful thing about our program. It's industry members helping other industry members. And we don't only take industry member volunteers. Any volunteer who loves the industry, who loves watching movies, who loves watching TV, we welcome them as well.
And Fred, I mean, this is incredible, everything. I know you've just been, I don't know if you've cloned yourself or you don't sleep or you've just been working tirelessly throughout this pandemic to really adapt and make sure that the volunteer services are not only just surviving, but thriving and innovating. Do you have thoughts about how some of this innovation might carry forward beyond when we ever get to some new normal?
I think we'll carry all of it ahead. And just to your comment about not sleeping, if anybody looked at the bio picture, my hair was dark then. And this is what happens.
Okay, you know, forget I even said that, because we're advocating good self-care. Everybody should be getting 8 hours of sleep a night. And
well, actually, I am. And one of the reasons why I am able to sleep well is because I know what I'm doing during the day. And doing what I do, bringing purpose to other people, is about one of the best things I think that I can do. Because I know how meaningful it is to everybody that I help. And I think that's what drives me. That's what gets me up in the morning, because I am able to work with people like you, with Naomi, with our other colleagues, Courteney certainly, on creating these programs and having the support to go ahead with them. And that's what's so wonderful about Mptf, the collaborative nature of what we do. So yes, all of these things that we're doing will go forward, but we'll also have the benefit, once we have a vaccine and people come back on campus,
right,
having an even more robust program than we already do.
Yeah, hopefully we come out and build back better and come out just really stronger than ever. This is really an opportunity, a renaissance for volunteer services, which have already been incredible, but in Mptf. And along those lines of all the great people that you get to work with, obviously working with the volunteers is a real part of the, obviously a central part of the strength of the volunteers program is the volunteers themselves. So I understand you actually invited one of our longtime volunteers on to this session to share their perspective.
Yeah,
right?
so I'd love for Greg to make himself visible. And in the beginning, you spoke about the 48,000 hours that were done last year. It's a huge number, but it's not necessarily the amount of hours. It's the way people volunteer, the meaningful volunteer aspect of it. And Greg is, I hope he's here.
I'm here.
I see him.
Okay,
Yep.
there you are. So Greg, you'll blush at this introduction. Greg Seymour is all about his heart. And not that it's ticking, which it is, but what he gives to the volunteer program, as really all of our volunteers do. Greg's dad was in the industry, which was his initial connection to us. His daughter was a junior volunteer, and then Greg followed in her footsteps and became a volunteer. And one of the reasons why I asked him to be on this call is not only does he volunteer with somebody who's a community member, but he has nurtured so many of the relationships that he's made on campus, not only with volunteers, but with residents, that when we were able to start bringing volunteers back on campus, Greg was, I believe, the first person I called, because he started, and this goes back to you, Scott, he started a walking group on campus, which you had initiated, and Greg has followed up. And for how many years, Greg, have you been working with residents?
7 years. And it's the best 7 years of my life, honestly. Besides the kids, the wife, the dog, Mptf, all the way. When people ask me what I do, aren't you bored because I retired early? I said, no, I'm a volunteer. And then they'll say where, and I'll tell them Mptf. Amazing place.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you do, how it started, and then how you expanded?
The way it started for myself was I became a phone buddy for a gentleman my own age who, on his way to Universal, was hit by a car. And at 57, he couldn't work anymore. And he lived in Hemet, still does. And I'd call him once a week, twice a week. He'd call me once a week. And I still talk to him probably 3 times a week. He's got nobody, and he just knows that we're all here for him. Then I wanted to get on campus, and Wendy Garfinkel said, well, what do you want to do? I said, just kibitz. I said, be out there talking with people. The best thing I did was I came on a Wednesday morning, and I met an unbelievable group of volunteers who we're all very close with. And I was introduced to people, and they just said, go. So I started to walk on campus, just meeting people. And then I started to come in early before they were having breakfast. And I'd go to the country house and sit down with people as they were having breakfast, introduce myself, and basically just talk for 10 to 15 minutes. And then I'd move to another table. Once breakfast was over and I had to find another spot, I started volunteering at Channel 22 for about 2 hours a day, a Wednesday. And this has gone on for many years. As I say, it's a great group of people. The residents there, even through COVID, I was talking to probably 6 or 7, and still am on a weekly basis on the phone. We were able to start up our weekly walk again with basically there's 4 to 5 residents, myself, my wife, and Larry, and we go together. We walk from, I'll meet a few people at the villa, and then we'll go to the Where did we go? To the lodge, pick up a few there, and we walk and sit outside of the country house for about 45 minutes. We separate the chairs. We just sit out there and talk. One of the residents brings music. We have a great time. The part we miss is we're not having our coffee, we're not having our muffins, but we're all behaving ourselves and enjoying. And for 9 months that we couldn't be there, we truly missed it. There's residents, as I say, I talk to, there's a few residents I talk to almost every day on campus. I need it as much as they tell me they need it. It's nothing like it.
And Greg, besides the residents, do you just want to talk a little bit about the bonding between the volunteers?
There are 8 volunteers on Wednesday. There were 9, or actually there were 10, but one just moved back to Italy. Our friend Lena, who was amazing. But the women will be in the knitting class in the morning, volunteers and residents. And then we all meet for lunch. And one of the volunteers there worked for motion picture for over 30 years. She's in her 90s now, and you know, she's an amazing volunteer. Still doing her knitting, and as I say, they have lunch with us. We all have lunch together. We have our own table there on Wednesdays. We get together a few times a year for dinner. Some of us have gone through the Magic Castle together. It's just an amazing group that we're with. And it's a caring group, because even the volunteers that we are not seeing right now, we're all still connected through our phones. And, you know, we talk every few weeks. Everyone wants to know what's happening. Everyone knows family members now. There's nothing like it. And the people you meet, the stories you hear are just unbelievable. I grew up, my dad was a character actor, and I heard about motion picture home all my life, because he used to say with a few other friends, oh, we'll each have our own residents, you know, we'll be residents there, we'll have our rocking chairs, and we'll talk about the old days. Unfortunately, he never made it there, because he would have truly loved it. It's just unbelievable. And as I say, the people I'm meeting, the people I talk to, my wife, when she was working, knew, do not plan anything for me on Wednesdays or Fridays. I said, it's not going to work. She retired a year ago, and now she's there on Fridays, and she started in the knitting class on Wednesdays also. So she knows exactly how I feel and why I felt this way for so long. You can't describe it. It's absolutely amazing. And, you know, I'll go on field trips with people, and times there's a few residents I've taken out to lunch, and we go to have a good time. And as a rule, we all laugh, and we do have a good time.
It's true. And I think that it's not just what you just spoke about. It's not just doing hours. You're developing relationships, and everybody is helping each other.
Absolutely. You know, the hours don't mean anything. You know, if they say, oh, Greg, we want you on Monday, we want you. Doesn't matter what the hours are. We're there. We're there in the evenings. And this is how all the volunteers are that I've come across.
It's so true. So thank you. And to all the volunteers.
Thank you. And for all the work you do. You're amazing, Freda. You really
Thank
are.
you, Greg. Of course, I paid him to say that.
She did. She did. The check's in the mail. It's like
Yes, it is.
The residual my dad would get today, 3 cents.
Well, I mean, I have to say, talk about an embodiment of the Mptf mission, you know, supporting each other and living and aging well. That's what we're doing with the volunteer programs. But again, and it's just this full virtuous cycle where that's how you live well and age well, is by giving back. And we're supporting each other in times of need. And, you know, the reason we have the volunteer programs, it's great for us, but it's also because there's real need out there. And the needs are only increasing, which is why we need to band together. We need people to step up and volunteer like never before. We need people to let us know if they need help, right? And call our elder connection so that we can get resources to them. So along those lines, I mean, I can't thank all of you enough for allowing me to join you for this great conversation today. Thanks to Greg, Freda, Naomi, really just honored to be involved in this conversation and to work with each of you on this great mission. And with that, I want to thank all of our attendees. I was loving seeing these great messages in the chat, and remind you all to pop into the chat to look for resources. And with that, to take it all home, our leader in all of this, Courteney Bailey.
Oh, well, first of all, not after hearing from all of you, am I the leader? What a wonderful way to end this, Greg. It's so lovely to virtually meet you, by the way you spoke about our mission. I mean, you guys, I work here. I took so many notes just from hearing of all the resources and the incredible things you do. Greg, I love that you said you need it as much as they do, and that your wife's involved. It's a true legacy of care, and to see the connections with Freda and Naomi and Dr. Kaiser, we're so grateful. For those who remember, I love to quote Coach John Wooden, who always has some great things, but just I'm reminded in this time that things turn out the best for people that make the best of the way things turn out. And I think that that's what we're trying to do. And Naomi, the resources that you've talked about, of course, you cannot talk about caregiving in an hour, but you did a really wonderful job chatting with Scott about everything that we can do. And we have extra resources. You've seen the chat, it's been very active. I would say at the worst, you go to our website, info@mptf.com. I don't think there could be an easier email address that we will make sure you get to the right people. But, you know, for Howard and Melissa and Jennifer and Phil Gittleman, one of our residents, thank you for being active in the chat. Thank you for everything that you're doing. Scott, thank you for moderating topics that are so in your wheelhouse and sometimes out, but for giving us such a great perspective. And Chief Innovation Officer, you sure bring that to us. I'll just end with that again on December 17th is our last webinar to talk about spirituality, to really bring this all home to that heart center and to that place of kind of what Greg was already talking about. He needs it as much as we need it. Like, let's bring that home together and just have a beautiful, hopeful end to 2020 and look forward to a brighter future, a different future, a more thoughtful future, and to MPTF's 100th year, which is just absolutely incredible. Peter, yes, so December 17th, so I see your chat, December 17th is, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. Peter, you're the best. And Kathy's also wrong too. I'm wrong, we're all wrong. It is December 16th. We will send that out. Today's the 17th, it's what's throwing us off.
Wednesday, December 16th.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Kaiser. December 16th is the resource. Kathy just corrected it. We will send out an invitation, forward it along. Truly one of the best things that you can do besides volunteering, showing up, just being an advocate, spread the word. We want as many people to join this as possible. And then December 19th, 2 days later, let's end that all in a really fun event. We have yet to send out the information, but Seth Macfarlane, who some of you may know as the voice of many of the characters on Family Guy, who does the Orville, he is doing a holiday concert to help benefit MPTF and the Bright Focus Foundation, of which Scott Kaiser sits on the board. They really are aimed around eye health, but you know, neuro issues and Alzheimer's and dementia, and they're a fantastic foundation. So we're partnering, we're aligning missions, and we just want it to be, it's free for all. Bring your family, sit by the fire, sit by a virtual Zoom fire, whatever you can do. Listen to some, you know, modern Tony Bennett kind of music. And thank you all so much for joining us. I can't thank our panel enough. Freda, Naomi, Dr. Kaiser, Greg, your wife, Naomi's entire team. Thank you all so much. And we hope you have the best week you possibly can.
Thank you.